Hello, my name is Brant. Today is the second day of May 2020, that is, and I want to talk to you about what what I would deal with is the issue of the damning teachings of what was professed and pushed by Augustine and what is being told today by Christian pastors to their flock. And what do I mean by that? Well, part of this whole setup is what was proposed and pushed by Augustine, the issue of original sin. And with that being true, according to him, he set up other doctrines that would have to be implemented to make sense of this. And so he introduced infant baptism. And when I say, again, original sin, I'm not talking about just sin that takes place and you do something wrong, per se, according to a Christian. Now, this is not my beliefs. I want you to know that. This is not my beliefs. But I came out of this back in 2009 and realized that what the church was teaching was error. And a lot of it had to do with Augustine. I also went to a seminary in Erskine in Due West, South Carolina, and I was able to get many courses in church history to teach what was taught in the early church. I actually looked online a couple of days ago and noticed that the same school that I went to, Erskine Theological Seminary, no longer offers anything in early church history at all. Nothing. So classes I took were worship, that is worship, how worship was done in the early church, a class on patristic period of the church, which means simply early church history, ecclesias Latin, in other words, the Latin language that was taught, spoken and written in the church, which is a different Latin than actually that we're taught in a regular school, per se. So it was mainly to do with what I call the Christian faith in Latin. And naturally, Latin was in Rome. So that was what was produced and pushed by at that time. And the thing that stands out about Augustine is Augustine did not know Greek at all. So he was dependent upon someone else to give him the interpretation of what scriptures were saying, that is, in the Greek language. So that's a major red flag right there, that already begins to think, well, okay, if he's such a great theologian and teaches this stuff, where's he's not able to read Greek or understand it, then what's going on here? I'm not saying he's not smart. I'm just saying simply is that he may have been getting some other getting that confused, or from others who wrote in Greek. So what happens is this necessitates other things. Suddenly, a Christian is not able to save himself. He's not able to do good works. He's not able to basically live a good life, as Christian would say, a godly life. All this necessitates that God has to do it for something. That God has to do everything for mankind. That's why Jesus offered his life on the cross. These things are being taught in a way that was not in line with what Scripture is saying truly. Again, I'm not a Christian, but I want you to understand they don't even follow their own teachings within the Bible. This was not taught in early Christian church history, was it? They would talk about sin, and it meant simply someone missing the mark. But it wasn't a concept that Augustine taught, that you were born into sin. You you came from your mom's womb, and you immediately you came out, you were a sinner. And if it hadn't been for God's grace, you had been a thief, a murderer, or whatever else is to do harm to mankind. So what I want to talk to you about is this idea that these preachers are preaching, especially in the Calvinistic churches, but it's also in the Wesleyan churches, which there's what I call two different branches that we were taught. After the Reformation, there were groups of churches that were basically Calvinist. That would be, or Calvinist thinking. That would be, and I'm not saying Luther is one of them. Calvin was one. The Presbyterians were one also, under John Knox, and others. But then as that point came along, there were other groups that would say, no, we're Arminian. We look at things differently. And we don't believe that actually you're born into sin as an original sin. But when you begin to search the Wesleyan and Methodist perspective, it's basically the same thing. It's taught a little differently. And I'll go into that sometime too when I get a chance, but I don't want to digress into that. So what takes place is this. Nothing takes place. Nothing happens. Just because you say a prayer, which they've made it so redundant now, asking Jesus in your heart, very easy to understand as a child, but as an adult, it doesn't make as much sense because it's like, okay, what's going on here if you think about it? And that's why the church is so super strong in getting people in children to get involved in children's church or in Vacation Bible School, because that's where they get their members from eventually, their hearers. And so they become lifelong members, giving to the church in many ways. And so with this grace idea, they're saved in their own sin. So, in other words, Jesus, in fact, preachers say this, that, you can be a obedient Christian, but you can be also a disobedient Christian. So this has gotten so convoluted that basically it's almost impossible, because no one teaches what we would call the early church history, the early belief system. Again, I don't agree with any of this stuff, but I want to explain this to those who may be Christians out there and are beginning to ask some questions. Is this stuff real or not? So here's the questions from their own scriptures, okay? In Ecclesiastes 7:29, it says, "Lo, this only have I found, that God made man upright, but man, have sought out many inventions. That's Ecclesiastes 7:29. Then I look at Deuteronomy 24:16, as I'm reading here of the scriptures. The father shall not be put to death for the children, neither shall the children be put to death for the fathers. Every man shall be put to death for his own sin." In other words, he's responsible for how he lives his life, and basically he is what I call, if your father's a real bad father, it doesn't pass down to you. So apparently somebody knew something here. And then I look at Ezekiel 18:20 here in Scripture, and I'm reading out of a King James Bible, KJV Bible, so that those who might have an issue with this, is not from a modern translation. This is the 1611 version per se. And so this is verse 20 out of Ezekiel 18:20, and it states, "The soul that sinneth, it shall die. The son shall not bear the iniquity of the father, neither shall the father bear the iniquity of the son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon him, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon him." And it goes on even 21. It says, "But if the wicked will turn from all his sin, that he had committed, and keep all my statutes, and do that which is lawful and right, he shall surely live, he shall not die. So, if this theology of doctrine is being taught in today's church is true, then they have a little problem. They got a major problem. They're not teaching even what's in the Bible. They're not. And again, like I say, I don't adhere to the Christian faith at all. I grew up in it. I have a video that shares about how many different denominations I was involved in. My family was involved in many different churches, to be honest with you. And I happened to go along because I was a child and that I believed this. I took the belief system at a church, at a children's church. So I'm telling you what's took place with me at 8 years old. And I lived that till I was 49 years old. I believed it. So over 40 years of my life was dedicated to Christianity. I also had a real problem, and this is who I was, to just give you an idea of my personality. When someone had a Christian IOXYE, which was Jesus in Greek, on the back of their car, like a little fish, and yet they were speeding down the highway, to me that was basically a bad rap for who Jesus was. What are you doing? Why are you not committing? Why are you disobeying the law? Okay. So I saw this as an adult. It bothered me enormously because it's like, there's the speed limit. Why are you disobeying it? So I saw these concepts that were ingrained into me at a young age, and I was adhering to those and following those to the best of my ability. Doesn't mean I didn't speed, but I realized simply is that, okay, and then begin to see other things that really started bothering me. And I asked questions. I was told by a couple people that you asked too many questions, Brant. And I'm like, no, I'm going to ask as many questions, especially these guys are preachers and pastors and they've gone to seminary. Let's find out what they really teach. And so I asked many of them. Many of them couldn't give me answers. In a Presbyterian church that I was going to, which is Calvinist. They believe that we're worse than worms, so we're awful people. But my point here is simply is this. Augustine created this mess. And this is what's being taught in the Protestant churches and the Catholic churches and also Eastern Orthodox churches. The Eastern Orthodox Church eventually broke off in the later, I think it was 10th, 11th centuries when when they, being Greek and Rome being Latin, a split occurred between the two. In other words, they were united as a Catholic Church, but then that changed. That took place, in fact, eventually the Eastern Orthodox Church was at their base was at Constantinople. Now the city is not called Constantinople, Turkey. It's called Istanbul. And so my point here is just to help you understand this simply is that they have used this as a tool for you to live in your sin, and nothing's really changed. Nothing has changed. When I grew up, just again to tell you a little bit about me, I didn't swear. I didn't use those language such and such. I do swear now, but I was taught that was, those are bad words, and saying the word God, D-A-M, was even worse. You were asking for judgment against you because of that. So you have to understand I grew up in a pretty much conservative viewpoint of church until later on in my life. And then I realized simply these swear words, they're not swear words. They're just simply part of the language. It reflects your frustration in the moment it comes out. See, I was not being who I was to be. In other words, when I got angry, I'd say, gosh, or, shoot, or whatever. And I wasn't expressing my own feelings at that point. So I hope that you understand that and begin to ask questions as a Christian. Because today, there's no difference in the divorce rate. In other words, and I'm just giving you an example. It's over 50%. There's hardly any difference between a Christian and those who are supposedly outside the church. As they would say, sinners. There's no difference here. It's all changed. Again, I'm not trying to jump on those who are Christians, but I am trying to say simply is you need to look at the facts. You need to understand that what you've been taught is not what you assume to be true. Most of us, in fact, accepted Jesus at a very young age. And so we've been taught or indoctrinated all of our lives, and we don't question those things. And the thing is simply is you do need to question these things. I can remember simply is that I was warned, which I didn't mess with it, but I'm just telling you that you didn't get involved in witchcraft or occult. So reality simply is that I didn't mess with those type of things. I was a goody two shoes in a lot of ways, and I was strict on my own self, and I was strict on other people. I felt such and such, and it helped me to somehow eventually, when I began to go to seminary, I wanted to be a church history professor. I really did. That was my hope and goal, to do that. And I was applying for getting my master's, and then eventually doing my dissertation and being a professor, teaching in a seminary. And that didn't take place because I realized I couldn't do what I was told in seminary. In other words, I couldn't teach a lie. I couldn't deceive others. Is the bottom line. If I taught them and got a job such and such, I wouldn't be able to do it because my heart would be basically, you're not teaching the truth, Brent. You're just teaching this because you're getting money from the seminary or whoever's teaching, whatever way you're getting paid. I wanted to teach many times in my life, but what I knew, I couldn't even teach in the schools. I did teach a little bit as a substitute teacher in a Christian school, but I come to find out simply is that they wasn't really interested in teaching truth themselves. It was basically just getting the right answer. This is something that really bothers me about schools. It's all about getting the right answers instead of being able to think. I think that's the biggest issue that's taking place with teaching. Most of it simply is getting the right answer. I have a problem with multiple choice simply because there's 1 out of 4 chances you get it right, or a true and false being 1 out of 2 chances of getting it right. I believe basically you need to have what I call, ask a question, explain it, and be able to explain it to the teacher and what you believe or whatever. Because that's the only real way you're going to be able to learn anything. And you're going to have to be able to think on your own, have logic, and be able to think on your own and not just spout out something verbatim because it was told to you. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope that some would see this and would be encouraged to ask more questions to themselves and even ask your pastors to see what their thoughts are and then begin to ask, okay, does this line up? Does this make any sense? Anyway, thank you for your listening, and you have a great evening. Take care. Peace.